This episode of Main Street Moxie is proudly sponsored by Hammertown and Northeast Ford.
Mary, nice to see you on Zoom today.
It's so nice to see you.
Well, I'm super excited. We're on California time today. So that's a new one for us.
Yes, it is a new one for us, but it worked out. And the guest we have today is going to have so much to tell us about Moxie and how to move our own Moxie needle through the lens of a concept called design thinking.
Okay, well, all of our listeners are on the verge of their seats. Who is it?
Yes, so we have Kathy Davies, who is the managing director of the Stanford Life Design Lab at Stanford University.
Ooh.
She is a mechanical engineer by training and an extreme runner, which I that is like geometry to me. I can't even imagine it. I first met Kathy taking the Design Your Life course for university educators through the Career Success Center at Western Connecticut State University. And my boss, Kathleen Lindenmeyer, is a firm believer in design thinking as it applies to life. And so I went on that course, and Kathy was one of the instructors.
Awesome.
And so I just felt that Design Your Life thinking had so much overlap with Moxie, and I'm hoping she's going to show us the ways.
Well, you've been talking about it since you took it about 7 or 8 months ago. So, and how it impacted your life and the life of your students and just your output on life. And then I love how it coincided with this notion of Moxie that we're doing. So I've been thrilled since you suggested we ask her to be on here. So I'm so excited for today.
Me too. So let's get right to Kathy.
Let's do it.
Hammertown is a bespoke lifestyle store and interior design service.
For 37 years, they've offered everything you need to feel at home. Whether you're looking for a gift or help in realizing your living spaces, Hammertown can help you put the heart into your home with antiques, furniture, rugs, lighting, and so much more.
Visit their locations in Rhinebeck, Pine Plains, and Great Barrington, or visit them online at www.hammertown.com and follow them on social media at Hammertown Barn. So, Kathy Davies, welcome to Main Street Moxie.
Thanks for having me.
We're so excited to have you.
So we usually start out with a couple of questions that Thorin is going to throw at you, and let's see where it goes.
Well, the first one we always love to ask is for our guests to define Moxie. So how would you define Moxie?
You know, it's so funny because I knew this question was coming and I was really tempted to go and look it up in the dictionary, but I gave it some thought. And what I think Moxie is really is the willingness to take action, even in the face of resistance. Mm-hmm. So for me, as I think about how that shows up in the world, it's often people who are maybe even a little afraid, but act anyway. And maybe flout convention a little bit. There's a little bit of the rebel in there somehow too, for me.
I love that.
I like the rebel aspect.
Yeah, me too.
So you are the managing director of Stanford's Life Design Lab. And we thought that the life design methodology could really help listeners think about and frame how to cultivate Moxie in their own lives, and also to hear about how it's helped you in your journey. So given that definition, I am hearing bias to action. So I don't know, do you want to start with that, or how do you best explain?
Yeah, no, I actually hear bias to action also. And that really dovetails nicely with how designers think, right? So when we talk about design thinking and life design, we talk about how designers operate in the world. And there are two things that we can talk about. One's the process of design thinking and life design, and the other are the mindsets. And so bias to action is one of those mindsets. In addition to those mindsets, there are things like curiosity. How do we approach the world with an open mind, maybe kind of like a child, seeing things in a new way? We also talk about mindfulness of process. How do we know where we are in a process? How do we take that process forward, break down big problems into small steps that we can tackle? We talk about the idea of storytelling. How do we make sense of things and tell our own story? That might have something to do with Moxie too. How do we put it together in such a way that we're getting the results that we want and opportunities that might come to us in the future? We talk about the idea of framing and reframing, which I think maybe is one of my favorites, is this idea of looking at problems from different perspectives so that you can come up with different kinds of answers or different kinds of solutions to the things you're working on. So all of that stuff plays a role as we go through this process of empathizing, understanding what are the needs that people have in the world. If you're thinking about life design, it might be the needs of yourself and your community. How do we define problems? That connects to this framing and reframing bit. How do we come up with lots of ideas once we've got a problem that we've framed that we want to work on? How do we come up with ways to make those ideas real in the world, to test them? And this is where I think the Moxie part really shows up for me, because this idea of taking ideas, because ideas are cheap, and taking action, which is scary,
right,
but in some really super small way. And that's what I like about prototyping, is it takes these big things, these things that we might be afraid to do, and allows us to act, because we do one small thing that's inexpensive, cheap, not much money, not much time either. We want to do it fast and we want to learn. So it needs to be easy, it needs to be accessible for us. So we got to be able to get started. And once we do whatever that thing is, that might be, if you're an engineer like I have been in my career, that might mean you build something. You take an idea and you make a tiny prototype out of popsicle sticks and hot glue. If you're talking about your life, it might be just talking to someone who's doing the thing that you think you might want to do. Or it might be just doing one small part of a project, or learning one skill towards the thing that you think you might want to do, to see how it feels, to test it out. And then that's the next step, is you test it. You take that prototype, whatever it is, and you try it. You either take it back to the people that you're designing for, if you're building a product or a service, or you notice for yourself, hey, how did that work? Did that conversation light me up? Did I feel like I want to be that person? Do I want to go there? Or, and equally valuable, no, that is not something I want to do. I tried that and it's a no-go. And that's really useful information. It's not a failure if you didn't like it or if it didn't work. It's just more information. And so that connects to Moxie really nicely, because if you're afraid, which a lot of us are, especially in times of change, and this has been a kind of crazy couple years, lots of change, often not with our consent.
right.
If there's a lot of change and a lot of ambiguity, we're often frozen. We're often paralyzed in place because there's too much going on and we don't know how to process it. We want to get the right answer. We don't know what the right answer is. And so maybe it'd be safer just to do nothing. We'll just freeze in place and wait. And if you have this idea of prototyping, it allows you to try something small that might reduce fear enough that you can get into action. And now we're talking Moxie, because now we're doing something, we're making a change in the world. And as soon as you change something, the future changes, right? And now maybe other people are involved with the thing we're doing. And maybe we've inspired something. Maybe we're now in motion in some new direction. And then things start to open up. So this is where I feel like Moxie and design thinking come together, is in this iterative process of coming up with problems that we think are worth solving, ideating, and then trying them, doing something with that biased action that you mentioned, Mary.
Well, I was just curious. So for someone who's looking to design their life, whether it be, their career or something personal or otherwise, do they have to have the bigger picture already to start prototyping? Or how would you advise, folks to look at it that way? Like I don't know where to start. So where do I start to even go down to dissect it to those prototypes and those tiny steps?
I really love what Bill and Dave, the authors of the book, Designing Your Life, boil it down to. They say, if you take all that stuff I just said and you make it real simple, get curious, talk to people, try stuff, tell your story. That's it. So the first step is, what am I curious about? What do I care enough about that I'm willing to do something, really anything? And then if I'm curious enough about it that I might want to explore it, the logical next step is somebody out there is probably doing the thing. Somebody out there is probably ahead of you on this journey. And so can you reach out to them? Have a conversation with them? I have a cup of coffee here. It's my cup of coffee. And a cup of coffee, this came out of my Keurig, so it's probably $2, $3. Those pods are kind of expensive. You go to Starbucks, it's $5. And if you take someone out to coffee, turns out there's some research around just having a hot beverage with someone creates connection. So you take someone out to coffee and you hear their story. Not very expensive. you're able to get out there, and these days things are opening up enough that we can get out there and have that conversation, you're going to learn some things. You're going to learn some things about their experience, their life. You're going to learn some things about what they're doing now, because in theory, you've reached out to them about something that they're doing that you're curious about. So you'll learn some things that maybe you could Google some of the facts of the domain or the job that they have, but you're going to learn the real details, how it actually goes down day to day. You're going to learn about the challenges they have. What are they facing right now? And I love that question about what challenges people are facing. In fact, I'm really curious. I'll maybe ask you all that later. The thing is, if you talk about the challenges that people are facing, then all of a sudden you're in this space of working on a problem with them, because they can tell you, this is the thing that I'm working on. And then you get to start thinking, if I had that problem, how would I tackle it? What ideas do I have for them? Now we're in collaboration around something that matters for the person that we're talking with. Now we're trying on a little bit, maybe a part of their role, because that challenge is something that in their role they'd like to solve. And if I've got ideas that I can bring to bear, excellent. Now I've helped them, and I've also had a chance to sort of play act, to really role play being part of the team. That's a little tiny prototype. If my ideas are terrible, also excellent, because now I know, wow, I don't have the skills or the know-how or the context to be able to help with that problem yet. And that yet is key, because now I know where I can continue to build and grow.
Right.
And I also have this felt sense of, do I want to be Mary? I'm hanging out with Mary, we're having coffee. And do I have this feeling of, wow, Mary's life is amazing, I'd like to grow into being Mary? Or do I have the feeling of, oh, wait, that isn't what I thought it was going to be. There's some things I want to check out further. So there's a slow down, speed up kind of a thing I can notice in myself. Am I leaning in? Am I resonating? Or am I feeling a little bit of trepidation? Is there something more I need to learn before I would want to explore that or to dive in all the way? And so for me, this idea of a prototype conversation, the talk to people part, is great because it's super cheap and you can learn so much in that period of time. And then if it feels good, then you can go on to the try stuff part. You can do something. Maybe I ask Mary, hey, can I help with the editing of this podcast later or something, right? I can dive in. I can dive in and try some part of the thing that I was super curious about. And then all of a sudden I've learned more. And then that just begets the next step. So it's this iterative thing. And then the storytelling part is really about, well, if I tell people about the fact that I came on this podcast and I helped Mary edit it and what is it that I hope was going to happen next? How have I been changed? How might that lead to collaboration with another podcaster or the next thing or the next thing? And telling that story in some way that makes sense for people. I'm putting it together in my own head. And now that leads to the next round of iteration. Where does that lead to additional curiosity? Where does that lead to next steps, new conversations, and new opportunities? And here we go.
So I'm interested in the aspect of design thinking that you've just connected the dot for me in this notion of collaborative Moxie, because just like in the book and in the training, we tend to think of our career and our life as this solo journey that we've got to figure out on our own. And now you've opened it up that your Moxie can be contributed to by others, and it's less lonely.
Absolutely. Life design is not a solo sport. It is a group activity. And that makes sense on a whole bunch of levels, I think. For one, we need each other.
Yes.
And I imagine, how did you all start doing this podcast together? I'm curious.
Go ahead, Mary. Go ahead.
Oh, my version of the story?
Go ahead.
Thorin hounded me mercilessly. No, she didn't. She was asked me several times. And last summer, I had some life events that I thrust myself into the Great Resignation and decided this is the time. And so we conceptualized. And although as I was taking the course over Christmas, I was in the heat of learning how to sound edit. And I was thinking, I didn't prototype this very well because this is super hard. But that's how it was. Baby steps. It was having conversations and brainstorming.
Planting the seed.
Yes. And Thorin can be persuasive. So
Thorin was telling the story. of like,
Yes.
hey, this is how it's going to be. Mary, we should
Yes.
do this thing. And then after a while, it sort of seeped in. And then you realized, okay, let's give it a go. And then you started. And I imagine in the depth of that sound editing and you were feeling like, I don't know about this. You and Thorne probably had a conversation and she said, no, it's going to be great. Keep going.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's this wonderful thing that happens when we're on a journey with other people. When we get tired, they might have energy. So they can prop us up and remind us, hey, why are we doing this? This is going to be fantastic. We're going to have this wonderful Main Street Moxie podcast and it's going to change the world. And so now we're in it, right? We're in it together.
Yeah,
and I think we so often think we're alone. We so often think we're alone. And when it comes right down to it, we're not designing just our lives. Design your life is pretty narrow when you think about it.
Right.
We're really designing our lives because we have relationships with other people. And that's probably one of the most important things that we've got going for us. The people around us, the people that we love, the people that love us. And when we look in the book at Work, Love, Health, Play, love is a big one. That's the one that has been shown through research to be almost the most important. This idea that the relationships that we have sustain us in such a way that it changes how long we live. It changes our physical and mental health. It changes our enjoyment of the moment. So if you're going to focus somewhere, this idea of designing together seems like a logical place to focus, because it's not just us. It's us, our kids, our parents, our friends, our families, our communities, our countries, are all the big we. And so, yeah. And I actually think this is something, I'll jump off my soapbox now, but I will say that this is one of the things that I worry about the most in the US anyway, is that we've gotten pretty focused on individual moxie. Like it's all about me. I'm going to win.
Yeah.
I'm going to start my company. I'm going to be the millionaire. But what about us? How do we connect with other people?
Another something that I found very powerful in taking the course and also teaching it is permission, and how design thinking is the authority figure giving you permission. It's not really an authority figure, but it's that thing that says it's okay to take the blinders off and go down a path a little bit. Yeah. And I wonder if you could talk about that, the liberation of permission.
I'm really glad you picked up on that, because I think it's something that not everybody notices in the early going. The idea that what we're really offering is a structure that gives people permission to try things. And because everything can be so amorphous and so confusing, as I mentioned before, there's a tendency for us to freeze. There's a tendency for us to assume that everyone else has got to figure it out. So I don't want to try something because I might look foolish. All of those things really paralyze us. And so what we like to say is, in a time of ambiguity, it's almost that you just need to do something, anything really, so that you perturb the waters a little bit, and now you have more information. Mm-hmm. And so it's permission to dip your toe, to put your toe in the water and wiggle it around a little bit, and then those ripples start spreading out, and then all of a sudden you're in it. You've noticed, hey, what is the temperature of the water? How's it going? And the fact that there's a structure and that it's pretty agnostic, meaning we try our best to not tell people what they should do. What we give them is a process. If you are here in this process, here are some tools that you could use to discover more information, to try something, to learn about the thing you're curious about. I don't actually care what direction you're going. I mean, I might have my own opinions about things, but they're irrelevant. What's important is, hey, what do you want to do? And I give you permission to try something toward whatever that thing is. And I give you some tools to do that. And so we practice things like having conversations. We talk to people in our class or in our workshop or in our one-on-one coaching in ways that then start opening up, diverging from this narrow, there's only one answer, to there's lots of really interesting answers out there. Which way do you want to go right now? And then all of a sudden, people have permission to realize, oh, well, first of all, I don't have to get right. There isn't one answer, and it's not just this. It's actually, there's a whole spectrum of things that could be pretty excellent. And then I also know what my logical next step would be. And so it feels safe to do that, to take that small step.
So young people, well, all of us, I mean, we're all
I was going to
young
say.
at heart. But I feel
Who's
like
young?
education does convergent thinking way too early. Like we're trying to focus high school students to pick and to find a path and then pick a major, and the dysfunctional belief that what you major in is what you're going to do. And I feel like that this convergent thinking, we're not divergent long enough in our lives.
Yeah.
And I see that, and I'm trying to address it in my own children, and also the ones that I teach. So anyway, I wondered if you could just define divergent and convergent thinking for non-designers.
I'm happy to. When you think about convergent thinking, we are trying to narrow down to a singular answer. So this is an idea, when we think about in school, we're often training on convergent thinking, just like you said, Mary. We are looking for the answer. Often it's the answer that the professor or teacher, whoever it is, the sage on the stage has said, this is the thing. And we're trying to organize all the information to get to that correct answer, correct, end quotes. Divergent thinking is the opposite. Divergent thinking is the idea that how do we come up with as many possible solutions as possible? How do we broaden the area of solution so that we can then have lots of wild ideas that get us into new schemas? And when I say schema, I mean categories of thinking. Our brain is really good at categorizing things. There's so much data that we really tend to try to simplify. Our brains are simplifying all the visual information, all the auditory information, and trying to categorize it into basically threat, non-threat initially, right? Hey, do I need to hunker down and hide from the saber-toothed tiger, or is it safe to go out? And then we're really trying to match it to past experience. And so that we can process it fast enough, because frankly, our brains aren't that good compared to these computers that we're working on. We're kind of lightweight processors, but we're really good at creating schemas. And so our brains are constantly trying to converge things into schemas. Hey, how does this match what I've seen before? How do I categorize this? And how does that then make it efficient for me to act appropriately, whatever that means, in order to stay safe? And in order to stay safe in our society now, we aren't in as much physical threat, perhaps, but we're in social threat. Hey, how do I behave with the people around me? What's acceptable? What's not? How do I move forward here? So what we are trying to do with design thinking is enable people to look at more schemas than the initial ones that they might try to converge to, that they might try to just narrow down. Hey, I'm going to come up with my one answer and then move forward there. Our first answer is often not the best one. Or maybe we don't have any answer at all. We're stuck. The one answer we've come up with isn't available to us for some reason. We don't have the resources. We can't do it. Whatever it is that's preventing us from getting that one thing that we think we want. And so then suddenly we can't move at all. And so if we're able to diverge and look at the question from different perspectives to really come up with more ideas than just that one, now we're cooking with gas. Now we have some more choices before us. And that idea then is that we can then move forward in a little bit in one of those directions, and off we go. So converging, coming to one answer, diverging, coming up with lots of answers before we choose, to increase the variety of ideas available to us so we can get unstuck. That was a long answer. Sorry about that.
That was a good answer.
Northeast Ford offers great sales and service, including a no-charge pickup and delivery for any service, even with oil changes. And they offer 2-year unlimited oil changes with any vehicle purchase, new or pre-owned.
Northeast Ford makes buying, selling, or trading in your car super easy. They have charging stations for your electric vehicle and a ready cash now offer and vehicle check on the spot if you wish to sell your vehicle. And they provide help with all the paperwork.
They service 6 counties, and they are located at 182 Route 44 in Millerton, where you can swing by and see Lan and his great sales team.
Or visit them online at www.northeastfordmillerton.com.
What Mary was saying about, today's children, in school are being pushed out with, and what you had said about today's society, I often feel, maybe it's my bias, but in getting stuck in one way of thinking that you feel sometimes that there's only a right or wrong. answer.
Mhm.
But what you're saying is there are many ways, there's no right or wrong, and there are so many different options or opportunities or ways to look at things. And I think the blinders thing that Mary was referencing before, I think is a part of that. But one thing we've talked to some of our guests before, and I think is a big part of this from what Mary's explained to me about this, is failure and how failure plays a part. And I think, in today's society with everything, and what we were saying before, like people think that they're alone on an island. How does failure, or is it even failure, play a part of design thinking, designing your life?
Well, the real question is, what is failure?
Right.
Because this idea that there's a right answer then means there's a wrong answer. And so it's the ratio between right and wrong. And I think our regular thinking about the ratio is there's one right answer and many, many, many wrong answers. And I think what we're trying to do is flip that ratio.
Mm-hmm.
There are many, many, many right answers, and wrong is in the eye of the beholder.
Right.
But there are real risks in the world. People aren't converging on these narratives for no reason. They want the best for their kids. They want the gold ring. They have this imagination of what success looks like, and it's based on perhaps what they see online or conversations they've had about money and objects, and different people define success all different ways.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the invitation in design thinking is to examine those narratives. Life design in particular, this instantiation of design thinking as we think about ourselves and our communities, is an invitation to think about, well, what really matters to us so that we can frame problems that are worth working on, not just the problems that have been framed by society. So if we look at the problems that have been framed by society, how do I get rich?
Right.
How do I get famous? Those are interesting questions. We could go there.
Right.
Maybe we're from a background where we haven't had many resources, or we've had all the resources in the world and we want to keep on with that lifestyle. Maybe there's actual threat to family, friends that we really do need resources for.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Then know why you're going after those resources. And if you define failure as I don't have the resources I need in order to be safe and well, that's a reasonable definition of failure. And now we get to ask ourselves lots of questions about how we want to get there from here.
Right.
And the idea that I'm going to be a software engineer, which is the number one choice at Stanford, or an NBA basketball player, or, you name whatever the narrative is about how we're going to get there from here.
Yeah.
And this very specific thing that we've settled upon, it really is an invitation to just notice, well, yeah, you could be a software engineer or an NBA basketball player, depending on your height, skill, and good with, are you good with the basketball?
Right.
You could be a writer. You could be a podcaster. There are a lot more ways to the top than we perhaps initially noticed, because the prevailing winds are all blowing towards software engineer. And so that feels like the path of least resistance.
Right.
And so if we don't do that, is that a failure? Well, no, I would say no. But, if that was your main goal and you decided that was the thing that you had to do to quote unquote be successful, you might define that as a failure. But our invitation from just our previous question about divergent thinking, the invitation is really be thoughtful about what you define as success and failure. Because if you define it in a way that allows you more grace, more leeway, more opportunity, that might be more enjoyable and more quote unquote successful. So we get to play with that. We get to play with what are our definitions of success and failure. The thing about failure in general is a big failure really hurts, right?
Right.
If you have a life-changing event, recently I was idiotic and decided that what I was going to do after doing a 30-mile run and being on tired legs was to show my daughter some long jumping drills that I had done in high school.
As one does.
One does. And I tore up my entire calf muscles. Basically, yeah. So, at the muscle tendon junction of my Achilles and my gastrocnemius and soleus, just tore that all up.
Oh dear.
I'm now in a boot and I won't be running again until October.
Oh my gosh.
I'm going to join you in that, Kathy. Don't let me run until October either.
Was that a failure? Well, one could argue that decision had some significant consequence. So you could define that as a failure, right? It wasn't the best. On the other hand, you could say I was spending some fabulous time with my 14-year-old daughter and we were doing something that really mattered to her and I was really into it. Maybe that's a success, a parenting success in one way.
Right,
I don't know. I don't know. I think that's what's really true is decisions do have consequences. we can actually fail, especially depending on our identities. We might be judged harshly for those failures. As a woman in engineering, a failure, something not working that I built, might be different than something that a man would have built. And all the more so for folks in marginalized identities around the country. So it's worth thinking about, hey, for any decision that I make, any action that I take, are there consequences? How is that going to be viewed? And I could decide to define those as success and failure. I think the invitation here is, well, pick an action you can take that'll move you in the direction that you want to learn about, that's small enough that if it doesn't go as planned, you still learn a lot. And if you learn a lot, that means the next action you take will be better informed. And so pretty soon we've tried some things, and now we've iterated with small steps to the larger success. But some of those steps may have been complete failures on the way. And the goal is with prototyping is just to make the steps small enough that whether they go well or poorly, they lead to learning that makes the next step better.
So are they really, if you're prototyping and you quote unquote fail, as some people view it, Mary and I have talked to so many guests, and we've talked about changing that word. Isn't it just a stepping stone, or you prototype there? Oh, that didn't work, but it taught me this. Isn't that part of the mindset thinking too?
That's framing and reframing. How do you frame what happened? How do you tell the story of what happened? Do you tell the story of, I'd like to use the example of you're at the coffee shop and you spill your coffee all over the floor, right? You can tell that story of, oh my gosh, I can't believe what happened today. It was a total disaster. Right. So you can tell that story, and it can be a story of your failure to control the coffee cup appropriately,
Yeah.
Right. Or you could tell the story of, I spilled the coffee and all these people came and helped me. And then we wiped it up and it was actually no big deal. And I was just so thankful that I had the money to buy another cup of coffee. Right. You could tell that story a totally different way. Same event.
Right.
That would never occur to me to tell it that way.
Same event, but you could tell it these different ways. And how you tell the story then determines the frame that you have on the events. And sometimes events are just bad.
Right.
Bad things happen. And sometimes it's really hard to look at. I mean, I'm not looking at my long jumping experience with a lot of like, wow, that was so great. I learned so much. But there are things that are out of our control. So we have a choice is how do we react to them? Now what?
Yeah.
Did the thing. It didn't go well. And so I hope that life design and design thinking give us some more frames on the thing instead of just beating ourselves up and feeling, man, I'm an idiot. Why did I do that? That was just stupid. We can say, okay, what did I learn from that? Hold up. If I look at this through the lens of prototyping, I tried something. Maybe I didn't consider it very well before I did it, but here we are. What did I get out of that? What can I take from that? What positive thing can I take from that will allow me to make a better decision the next time? And, whether you define it as success, failure, or just a prototype really depends on your state of mind, I think. And also how much pain you're in, frankly. Because I'll be honest with you, the moment that happened, I was not reframing. I was not thinking to myself, wow, look at this fabulous learning experience. I was angry. I was hurt. I was, all the things, all the emotions. And so there's a space also in the life design process. We add on to the front of that design thinking process, this accept hexagon. And Mary, you might remember that from the training. And I'll say, I wasn't in the accept state. I was in the hell no, this makes me so angry state. And if someone had said, well, you need to reframe this right now, I would have basically, made lewd hand gestures and probably done some yelling and swearing. So that just wasn't available to me at that moment. I was in the grieving and upset and angry part. And I think that's okay, right? Sometimes we feel like it failed and we have all the feelings and we got to let that happen first before we can do the next thing, the framing, the reframing, the iterating, the prototyping, the learning, all of that. So
when you were hit with those bad times in life that, there's no reframing, can't you say that the design of your life portion or the mindset or how you view things can be also applied to how do I move from this or how do I deal with this?
Yeah. And I think this is where we get to ask ourselves some different questions. The
Yeah.
question you could ask is, how do I heal this right now? Or you could say, okay, how do I take care of myself
Right.
while I'm grieving this? Or how do I, there are choices that we can make. Sometimes there are just a lot of bad choices, to be honest. Sometimes we're in a situation where there doesn't feel like there's a good choice, but there usually are some choices. And so then we get to decide, okay, well, what do I need to do right now? What's the next logical step? And I think that's what I like about the design thinking process as a tool. I can look at this process and say, okay, what hexagon am I really in? If I find that to be useful structure, and it's just one structure of many, there are lots and lots of, there's structures of grieving and structures of all kinds of structures, 12 step processes. It doesn't really matter what structure you pick, but when you have a structure, you can look at where you are in the structure, and then you can notice, okay, what tools do I have to move from here to the next, whatever feels like the logical next step. And the thing I like about that is it's comforting. When everything is gone to hell and it's an ambiguous mess,
Right.
you have something to hold on to, the structure. And then when you're ready, you can do something about it or with it.
Right.
So yeah, I do think it's really useful, especially in those times of ambiguity, because when we are afraid, when we are frozen, when we are grieving, all of those things, we might not be able to act in that moment, but we can notice, okay, here's where I'm at. This is what needs to happen. Maybe it's just I need to spend a bunch of time meditating, or I need to spend a bunch of time praying or grieving or crying or. And then we can say, okay, now when I'm ready, I know that the next thing will be I've empathized with my situation and I'm going to define something I can work on when I'm ready. And then from there, that's that framing and reframing. How do I define it in lots of different ways, and how to so for me, that's just really comforting to know there's a structure, to know it's just not a total chaos. And like I said, any structure can work. I just happen to like the one that I teach a lot.
So I have a confession to make about design thinking when I was first setting out, and that it was a luxury that
yes,
for people with money or with freedom, however you define it. And I was very comforted to learn that because it's not just about your work life, it's your whole life, being in alignment, being cohesive, and that there's an acceptance that sometimes there's some part of your life that you cannot change, whether it's being a parent or being in a job because of the health insurance or the schedule that it allows you. And that I found it very empowering to look at my whole life and say, okay, well, that part's off limits. I really can't do much here, but I can do stuff in these other quadrants. And I feel like that's one of the most powerful messages when I'm teaching this, is that we're looking at your whole life here, and that you can prototype in a number of different ways, whether it's running a mile or reading a book or having a conversation. And I just personally found that very powerful in my own life.
Oh, I'm curious, what got you from the space of, hey, this is just a sort of a privileged and sort of luxurious process, to that moment when you realized, oh, actually anybody can use this? What made that shift for you?
I think it was taking the course with and I think I might have asked that direct question in the workshop. And then the other place that I found that was in this concept of core desired feelings, and not so much focused on what do you want to do, but how do you want to feel? And that you might not be getting those feelings of creativity in your job, but then you're going and you're acting in a play after work. And so you're getting fed in a global sense. And that's what I like about design, is that it's your global life, not just your work life, not just your out of work life, your whole life. And that I think sometimes we segment our lives into my work life, my home life, my this life, my that life. And it makes us think we're not being fed when we can get what we need. It might not be from here, but we can get it there. And I find that to be really powerful in design thinking, is this global view of our lives.
I find that really powerful too. And I think it flies in the face of some narratives that are pretty privileged. This idea that, oh, my work's going to be my everything. It's going to be this hugely impactful, I'm going to enjoy work all the time. It's going to be so fun. We have these narratives that have sprung up, I think partly because of social media and just people posting all this, like, my life is fantastic. But I think we've put a lot of pressure on our lives that is a bit unrealistic.
Right.
I don't know about you all. Maybe you all have been more fortunate than I in some ways, but every job I've ever had has had incredible highs and incredible lows. Has had the things I love doing and the things I tolerated. And I don't know that we talk about the fact that it is normal in our lives for things to go wrong. It is normal for there to be low times, and it's normal for there to be high times. And all of it's temporary. The idea that anything is going to last forever is probably the biggest lie that we've told ourselves. Everything changes all the time. Entropy, it's a thing. So when we think about all of this, when we think about, hey, how is design thinking useful in different contexts? It can be considered to be a huge luxury in a lot of ways, because you could think about it as, wow, people are saying I have choices and that my choices are all good. Well, we're not actually saying that all the choices are good. I hate to say that. We're saying that we often have data and we can do things about it. We can come up with ideas and we can potentially try something. But the things that are available to us might be a myriad of hard things. And we get, you were saying, my life is like this, and I have, these areas of my life are off limits because I'm not willing to work on them right now because I've got some pretty hard constraints. And the thing that I love thinking about is, okay, which constraints are constraints that we want to push against, and which constraints are constraints that we don't want to push against right now, right? I can work on big global problems of injustice. And it might be really hard, but it might be really worth doing. It might feel really bad in the moment, however, because I'm pushing against really tough stuff. And I get to decide, do I want to do that or not? Well, I do, because it's important to me. It matters. It's worth doing, even though it's uncomfortable. Other things you might look at and you might say, well, do I want to take this role or this role? And this one might not be as fun. I'm not going to take that one. I'm going to take this one. Great. You have the luxury of choosing between two roles that might be sort of different amounts of fun. That's terrific for you. I might be facing two different minimum wage jobs that neither of which seems all that great, but one's a little closer to home. And so in terms of travel time, that'll allow me a little bit more time doing something else that I find fulfilling and energizing. And so I'm going to pick that one because I'm going to pay rent. I still have a choice. You might say, well, my choices are better because I'm picking between software job A and, other fancy job B, and you're picking between these two. But the fact of the matter is we're choosing all the time. We're all making choices and we're all gathering data. And this idea of prototyping, in my mind, is actually even better when you're faced with hard choices.
Yeah.
Because now I get to try it out a little bit in whatever way I can. I'm going to go talk to somebody who works at that minimum wage job and that minimum wage job and just find out, are the bosses any good? Right? Because the fact of the matter is I have to work for that person. And if they're a jerk, that will not be enjoyable. Right. And, or what's the bus line? I take the bus to work as it happens. And the fact that I'm living near the bus is great because I can ride my bicycle to the bus and then I can take the bus across to Stanford. And that saves me a ton of money, ton of, bridge fees, all that stuff. I get to do a little work on the bus and then I can bike home if I'm feeling super energetic.
In my boot.
It's right. Well, I know right now, dang. But the thing is, we are making these choices all the time. And so if we have tools to gather data, in my mind, it's not about privilege. It's about, do we have the tools? Do we have the ways of thinking? And then how can we apply them in whatever context? And some of those contexts are not good. I mean, it's just true. Some things are really hard.
I guess I should clarify. The part of the privilege was that design thinking was about wholesale changes in your life. And what I really learned was that it's about you can redesign and get a whole other job. And I think what I've now understand is it's these baby steps in areas that you're asking why, you're building awareness and you're making choices. And I think that's where the privilege comes in. It was the privilege to cast off some life thing that you're carrying.
Yeah.
And it's not that at all. And then that's when I kind of really let my guard down and fell in love with design thinking.
I'm
So
so glad you did. I think that because one of the big exercises in life design is this idea of building odysseys. We have this exercise we do where we invite people to come up with 3 radically different versions of their future. And one of them, we invite them to let go as many constraints as they can. We call it the wild card life. So the idea is if you had enough money and you had all the resources you needed and no one would laugh at you, what would you do? And I think for some, this is really a threatening concept because it feels like, well, that's unreasonable. I will never be able to I have real constraints in my life. And it feels threatening for good reason because it's now pushing up against some hard realities. And that doesn't feel good to look at things and say, well, I'll never be able to do that. I'll never be able to cast off my life. I have children, I have responsibilities, I have bills to pay, and I'm never going to just go and be a bartender in Belize, just leave town and I'm out. And so for some, and for many, I think that can feel like, well, now you're just showing me cake I can't eat, basically. And why would I do it then? That's just going to be painful and unreasonable. And having done this now for a long time, I will say, yeah, you probably won't shuck off everything and be the bartender in Belize. But if that is something you're interested in, could you go to the beach next weekend? Could you make a drink for a friend? Is there some small piece of that you can inject into your current life that would make your current life just a little bit more fun, a little bit more coherent, a little bit more delightful, a little bit more whatever it is you want to work on? And so those ideas, when taken wholesale, do seem ridiculous. And in fact, they are ridiculous. I can't just leave town, go to Belize, but maybe I can inject some little piece into the other bits. And so there is some realistic instantiation of this idea that I can bring. And that's why I love the exercise, because it allows you to sort of dig deep into the subconscious for things that you may have abandoned in the face of all the real constraints and reality that you encounter every day. We let those dreams die. We become, as kids, everybody's going to be in the NBA and going to fight fires and also be in the ballet. And also, right, we as children, we have all these ideas about what we're going to do with ourselves and no idea of any constraints. And so therefore we dream big. But over time, it's smashed out of us by that. Yeah, but you aren't that good at math, so you probably aren't going to be an engineer. There are all these ideas about what kind of capabilities we have. We have realizations, man, I'm not that tall, so the MBA is looking a little iffy. There are all these different realities and constraints that are either impressed upon us or in fact just are based on what it is that we're encountering in our day-to-day life. And so we forget to dream. That get curious part, people tell us, well, don't be curious, just get it done. Be efficient, be productive. Don't be curious, be rich, there's all these different things that we're supposed to be. And be curious isn't one that you hear all that often, but that's the first step, right? Is to let yourself be curious, let yourself dream a little bit.
Yeah, I think we hear a lot, be passionate.
Oh, be passionate.
Yeah. So I've ratcheted way back to be curious, because I feel like that word has become so overused, it's meaningless.
It's not useful for many of us.
No.
The research shows that 80% of us don't have a singular passion that we can articulate. That means that there are only 20% of us that question serves. What are you passionate about? Because for the rest of us, the answer is, I don't know.
TV.
Right. I don't know. So what are you curious about is just lower bar. And then, Carol Dweck's written the growth mindset book. Greg Walton has done a lot of work on belonging. What they've discovered is that if you look at how passion develops, it doesn't start just like fall into your head all fully formed. What actually happens is you start doing stuff and then you get a little better at it and a little better at it. And pretty soon you're getting to be kind of a master at it. And people are coming to you and asking for your help for things. And suddenly you have this feeling of, I can do this. It's valued in my community. Oh, I think I quite like this. Now I'm passionate about it. Now I've got this hammer that I've, carefully crafted over many, many times. And I've been working on all these different projects that I can use in situations that are important to me. Now I'm passionate about it. So passion grows. It's not fully formed. It grows out of engagement. It grows out of mastery. It grows out of it doing the things. And so I wish we talked about that a lot more with our students. Right. What do you want to try right now? What do you want to build into? Because very few things just come to you whole cloth. It's all the process.
I'm just curious about, now, obviously this is being taught at Stanford. Why is it being taught to college age students-ish? Of course you have grad students and all this. What is the importance of having a course like this for that age group? Is there something in our society today? We mentioned social media, where earlier you mentioned, that we're not in fear of the saber-toothed tiger coming to eat us. I mean, what is it about a program like this that is now important to have in the lives of, that 18 to 30, 35-year-old, depending on, the age group? But I think it applies to everyone, obviously, but I'm just curious why Stanford has a program like this.
I think those are two different questions, but why does Stanford have a program like this? Mainly because Bill and Dave started prototyping it in a small classroom with 6 graduate students, and it caught fire.
Awesome.
They started telling their friends about it, and pretty soon it grew, and then they were teaching more students and more students. So it grew over the course of started in 2007. So what are we at now? Right? We're
15 years?
15 years. So it grew over the course of 15 years. And now the book made it a big deal in 2016. But before that, it was 2 guys doing some stuff. And then they hired some grad students. Then students found it useful. Why is it useful for folks? I think it's useful for folks of all ages, but it's especially useful for folks in transition. And in the space of college, there are 2 main transitions. I leave home if I've gone to a residential college. And so I'm differentiating. I'm becoming an independent entity.
Right.
And then I leave academia and I go into the world and do something else for many folks. Unless you're going to be a professor, you probably now are out in a different industry. Right. You're not in education anymore. And so 2 transitions in about a 4-year period for a lot of students. So that's a lot of transition. And it's also a lot of change and growth internally, right?
Right.
People are going from being teenagers to being physically adults, and they're starting to form relationships. There might be lasting relationships over the course of their lives. They're starting to really become the people that they are going to become. They're in a time of great process. So I think it's especially useful then because there's just a lot changing. There's a lot of ambiguity. And where design thinking shines is in transition and in ambiguity. So this is a good spot to put it in. They're also independent enough that they can make some decisions without having to consult everybody else. If you're talking about high school and middle school, there are a lot of folks who think, oh, we should do this then. The sooner the better.
Right.
And I would say yes and no. Yes, because I really like the idea of giving folks these tools. And no, because at that age, you aren't yet independent. And so if you developed an odyssey that said, I'm going to be a rock star, and you showed it to your parents who are very practical and worried about paying bills, their response might logically be, no, you're not.
This is being recycled right away.
Right. And hearing from somebody's, whose opinion you value and who you love and who cares for you, that your dreams are not worthwhile, that might not be a positive thing. That might actually be quite damaging in some ways. So depending on the circumstances, you might say, well, let's wait till they can be in a space where ideating will be acceptable. And how do we create that? Now, do I think that we can teach design thinking to our youth? Absolutely. Do I think that we can teach life design tools to our youth? Absolutely. I think we just have to be really careful and really cognizant of the real constraints that someone who is 11, 12, 13, 14 is facing versus somebody who is 20, 21, 22, and who can really make independent decisions with a different level of autonomy.
Okay, great.
With the few remaining minutes, Kathy, your bio is super interesting. Like, you seem like the poster child for design living.
You would think, but it's not true.
Well, I mean, you were, or maybe still are, a hardcore engineer making stuff. You have 5 patents, which I got to get me one. And then you pivoted over to this designing lives. So what has that been like for you? And you run 30 miles at a pop.
Well, let's see. I think really what this points to is I'm a nut. Yeah, I would not say that I have been a very conscious life designer. I have been an unconscious incompetent or a conscious incompetent a lot of my life. Basically, I think that the one thing that I'm really good at is the get curious part. I'm deeply curious, and I think a lot of things are really interesting. And so my career has been all over the map because I'm a bit like a magpie. I keep seeing shiny things and then kind of heading over to check them out. And then I get there and they're cool. And so I pick them up and then they're in my stack. I've done all kinds of things. I've taught high school physics. I have worked in startups. I have worked in software startups. I've worked in hardware startups. I've worked in medical device startups. I've taught product design at Stanford, and now I'm teaching this life design stuff. Started my own little company as well. So it really is a process for me of, well, what's interesting and what do I have the capability of doing? And then how do those two things come together? And I've been so fortunate that I have the resources that I've been able to do crazy things and still be able to pay the bills. And my first job out of college, I taught high school at a boarding school, and I got paid $18,000 a year. But room and board was paid for, so that was fantastic. And I was able to buy a car. That was great stuff. And I met my now spouse. So, was that a success or what? It was because I didn't know what else I was going to do. In all honesty, at the end of college, I'd been a rower and I'd been playing sports, and I looked up and realized I'm going to probably need to do something after this. And my idea was I was going to travel around Europe and check things out. And I told my parents this, and they said, "Who's going to pay for that?" And my parents said, "Who's going to pay for that?" And I said, "I don't know, would you?" And they said, No, we helped you pay for college. And now is the part where you're a financially responsible adult and you get a job. I said, "Well, okay, I'm going to go to Europe and I'll just waitress or just get jobs like that. And it'll be great." And they said, this was before we had the Affordable Care Act. So at 21, you're just off any kind of healthcare. And they said, "No, you're going to get a job because you don't have healthcare. And given that you do extreme sports, you will hurt yourself in Europe and there will be nothing to support you getting back together. So you should not go to Europe." I think they said you can't. And I at that time just accepted that as a true fact, even though I probably could have gone. So I thought, okay, well, I guess I'm going to need to get a job, but I was graduating in a month. I mean, I had all of my friends had interviewed with McKinsey and gotten these fabulous roles at big name companies and were making lots of money. And I was panicking. And my friend said, "They're always looking for women science teachers."
They still are.
I was like, okay, maybe I'll do that. So it turned out there was a boarding school back east, Choate Rosemary Hall, and they were looking for a woman who could teach physics and coach crew.
Perfect.
There was. And they hired me. And then, that's what happened. And so, each of the things that's happened for me has been truly just about being curious and being lucky, to be honest, and having great people around me and wonderful supporters. And so this idea of designing our lives, boy, I've just had incredible mentors and friends throughout my career. And then, they go to another company and then maybe I go see them and follow them later and so it's just been an amazing process. But I wouldn't say it was conscious. I look at it now and I chuckle because I'm teaching all these skills that I had no clue about during the time that I was my student age.
But I think one thing that I absorb off you is an openness to entertaining ideas. And that just kind of, comes through Zoom, even that you have that in spades. So
thank you.
I think that's part of your Moxie.
Thank you.
Is your openness. And now we turn to the last part where you've given us a ton to think about in our
so
listeners.
Much.
Is there one thing, the idea that binds them all, or something that you would say was a great first step for someone to help cultivate their own Moxie?
Well, get curious, I think, is the obvious one. But I'm going to add to that and say, get curious about others, because at the end of the day, I do think that it comes down to empathy. Design thinking is a human-centered design process. It's about the people. And so pay attention, all y'all out there who are listening to this podcast. Pay attention to what's going on with other people. Connect with them, collaborate with them, be together and do things together. Because I think that's where the magic happens. It happens when you've got an idea and you invite other people to join in that idea, and you start doing something small, and then it becomes something bigger. And it always starts small, and it always starts like with a partner like this, right? You two started this thing. And that is what part of what I imagine has made it successful, is that you have each other to work with. And so look for those people out there that are going to be your friends, your collaborators, your fun acquaintances, whatever it is, and design with them. I think that's maybe my advice.
Amen.
Love it.
Thank you so much for joining us today. This is going to be a great episode for our listeners, so we're really excited.
It was such an honor to meet you and talk to you about this and learn so much more about this.
It's my pleasure. And really the honor is all mine. You all are amazing.
Mary, that was fantastic. Yeah, mind blown.
Exactly.
Well, it's all about the mind, right? This conversation about thinking and how you perceive things and how you just look at things. And I think that's so cool and important.
So what was your takeaway from Kathy?
Oh my God. I love her. First of all, well, in her conversation and the question I asked last about why Stanford is providing this class, and, why they are placing an emphasis on this and taking credits. And, because as you and I were talking afterwards, like, you have to take credit, certain classes, math 101, statistics, English 101, whatever it may be. So the fact that they're offering this, I think is super interesting, but because of where we are in society, where our next generation is, and just about also the philosophy of life and how you view things. And, something you touched upon and she did as well, is about the blinders and how you can not pivot, but how you just look at stuff and how it's not so just one dimensional or one way, but you can look at something, even though you may not go down that route. I think it's important just to do the exercise and to teach yourself that, what makes you happy and how do you get there? Or if you are in a certain situation, where are other places in your life that you can do other things, or maybe you want to do things just slightly different, and talking to people. And I know that's a big one for you, the community aspect. So there are just so many parts of that I thought were so fascinating, but, just the whole time she's talking, I was like, oh, wow. Oh, and you always put things in your own life. It's like, oh, I kind of do that. I can improve on that, or, take the blinders off with that, or reframe a situation. So I was just so blown away by all of that, from my own personal, viewpoint.
Well, it sounds like Kathy has given you permission
for sure
to take the blinders off, and taking that university educator training and then teaching it 2 courses worth at Western Connecticut. I've seen the power of this, and some of what design thinking does is not going to show up in test grades.
Well, of course
it's going
not.
to show up in how a student views their life, and the hope that they have about their life, and the freedom that they have to think about it in different ways. And the community part is very important to me, and seeing that you don't have to be alone in this life planning journey, that you can call on other people, and other people are really happy to help. And the one last thing that I wanted to emphasize that we didn't get to is it's really important in design thinking to have an accurate assessment about where you are. Because if you can't pinpoint where you are in life right now, there is no way that you can find a path forward. It's like saying, I want to get to California. Well, you can't tell me how to get to California unless you know where I'm starting from.
Right.
And I think that's really important for all of us to think about, where are we right now? What is holding us back? What do we have that are our strengths? What can help us go forward? And I think that is really critical part. And I just find this to be such a powerful tool, and meeting Kathy, who to me is like the combination of all good things.
Yeah, she's a
And
dynamo.
she is, and she passes for me the airport test, which I don't know if you've seen the movie The Internship.
Yeah. But
So,
I don't. What's the analogy?
So it's basically you judge a person by, would you want to be stuck on a stool next to them at the bar at the airport with a delayed flight? And I would take a stool next to Kathy
any day. Yeah, please.
So, all right. See you soon.
Bye.
This episode of Main Street Moxie is proudly sponsored by Hammertown and Northeast Ford.